Wonderful. Thanks for coming to my webinar on such a beautiful day.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I know this is something that I really need. I've been struggling with, so I said I better take advantage of this opportunity.
Well, fantastic. I'm only planning to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and so there should be lots of time for questions specific to some of the work that you were doing.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's great.
excellent. Wonderful. We'll just see if anybody else shows up. I had about 3 or 4 other people said that they would be able to make it, but given the beautiful weather outside, I don't blame anyone for.
Lord, I know. It would be kind of hard.
Yeah. I'll switch my screen share to
Mhm.
the um, outline for today.
Okay.
Let's see, share. And I'm planning to post this outline to the Sacred Heart Learning Center's blog, so it'll be accessible after.
Okay.
Can you see that okay on your
I
screen?
can see it clearly.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. Maybe just wait one more minute to see if anyone else shows up.
Okay.
Um, and the way I put together this outline was really based on submissions we've got to the online writing lab, and the things that I see maybe go wrong in the early processes of planning a paper, all the way up to final revision before submission.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think after I start writing, and I think my problem is I just, after writing a whole paper, you get lazy,
Yeah.
having to continue to read. And that's the most important thing of it. But I just think that I miss a lot of stuff because as I'm writing, I guess I should talk as I write to make sure that it's flowing, and it's correct grammar. So I don't know. I
I
guess
would say, from
I
my
have organized thoughts.
from my experience, it's probably good to get a rough draft down in any way, shape, or form. And
Mhm.
so it doesn't matter at that point if you've got incomplete sentences or run-on sentences. It doesn't matter because the only person who's going to see that draft is you, and you're just trying to get your thoughts on paper.
Well, you're right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
cool. Alrighty, well, I think you also mentioned something else that's good, which is read, read, read. And that's actually my first point under my first point in the outline. So we'll probably just get started and then see if anyone joins us. And if not, then more time for questions for you.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
So really, I think the first basic under doing a successful job of being a scholarly writer is to open yourself up to learn from others. And
Mhm.
April, just like you were saying, reading is so important because when you read what other people have written, you get a sense of how they've been successful at doing scholarly writing.
Mhm.
But especially if you're going to be writing about that piece that you're reading, it's difficult to write something, an analysis of a piece, unless you've read that piece more than once, because the first time you read an article or a book, you're really just trying to figure out where the person's going. And once you finish that first read, you have a better sense of where they're going to end up. Then when you go back to the beginning, you see how they've crafted that argument. So you can really study scholarly writing by looking at the way other people do it and trying to break that down and understand it so that you can kind of reproduce and model yourself after them.
Okay.
Asking a librarian is another way to kind of learn from others. They're very skilled in research and knowing where references exist for you.
Mhm.
Um, Going to your professor, I think a number of students forget that they can actually kind of go back and ask their professor for clarification or questions. Some professors, depending on the assignment, will even read through your paper in a rough draft form. And then, of course, scheduling a session with a tutor. April, you already know how to do that. We've already been working together. So, but there's actually a process for, especially during the school year when they've got their whole staff back at the Jan Drzewicz Learning Center up there on the hill on campus, where you can schedule an in-person tutoring session. But we have the online writing lab as well, where if you're a fully online student, or for whatever reason you can't physically make it into Sacred Heart campus, we offer critiques and edits of student papers there. And you can always email me personally as well, and I'll be happy to take a look at anything that you've got.
Okay.
So then number 2, develop a process that works for you. Like we were talking about, April, before we actually really got started on this outline, writing a rough draft is very important, because it's almost like, I think it was Mark Twain said, how do I know what I'm going to say until I've started writing? And then the way in which the writing process is kind of you hashing out your response to the question that your professor asked of you. So I see Paula has joined us. Hi, Paula.
Hello.
Can you hear us fine?
Yes, no problem.
Excellent, wonderful. We just really started. We're on point number 2, developing a process that works for you for scholarly writing.
Yes.
And this outline will be available on the Learning Center's blog, so you can get everything in full. And we are actually recording today's session, and so the video recording playback will be available as well, so you can pick up point number 1. Excellent. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful day.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. I laugh saying, you can never, I'm a pretty decent writer, but I feel like I'm not, let's say, scholarly writing is a new thing. And
Absolutely.
so
I feel that.
Different style, it's just a different style. And so it doesn't matter what skill set I come with or what knowledge base I have. I almost have to it's almost, I don't want to say, it's not that it's harder for me, but I have to take a different approach, a beginning approach.
You're absolutely right. It is its own genre. And so I also write poetry in my free time. And I've published about, I think my 5th book is due out before the end of the year.
Nice.
And the strategies I used to be successful writing poems is not all the strategies I should use to be successful with scholarly writing. So you can be an award-winning novelist, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to know how to do scholarly writing. Absolutely. So if you've had some challenges in your scholarly writing, it doesn't mean that you're not a good writer. It just means you've got to study this genre and what tips we can offer you, and studying what other people have done was one of our first points on this outline here. Cool. And so once you've got a rough draft, we're talking about developing a process that works for you. Once you've got a rough draft, and that rough draft doesn't have to be seen by anyone, but it should be something that's useful to you. Whether it's an outline like what we're looking at here, or whether it's just notes on a cocktail napkin, whatever it is that works. Develop that rough draft. Do that so that you've got something to revise later. Because without initial thoughts on paper, it's hard for you to take that to the next level. And that's a lot of what we're hearing from faculty, is that they feel like students maybe wait to the last minute, and what they submit is really what should have been a rough draft, that if the student had let it sit for maybe 24 hours and come back to it, that quality of writing would have naturally just become something that's a lot more successful in terms of being evaluated by the professor. And then getting a peer or tutor to review. You don't actually have to book an appointment with a tutor at the Writing Center. You can ask a classmate to exchange papers with you. It's probably best to ask out of a classmate. We have students who sometimes ask out of family members, but that becomes difficult because the assignments that you'll be working on are really a product of the class you've been taking. And it's hard for someone, it's even hard for us sometimes as tutors. We have to really, we ask you to share the assignment prompt with us, and maybe even share a sample of your writing if you've done another paper previously in the class, to get a sense of what you're really working on in that class, and what the professor is asking for. Because a lot of what the paper is going to be judging is what you've learned in the class up until that point. So asking another classmate to exchange papers is a really good way to get some peer feedback on that assignment. And that person may, bring your attention to something you missed earlier in the class, or that person has taken something down in his or her notes that you missed, and then sharing knowledge in that way. I mean, that's the whole reason that, we've got groups of students taking classes together so they can learn from each other as well.
Okay.
So unless anyone had any questions, we'll move to point 3, following directions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so following directions is a big one. One of the things that we do as tutors when students bring us their papers is that we just look to make sure that everything the professor asked for was actually given in the paper. And that's really important because in the stress of writing, you can sometimes neglect a whole point that the professor has asked you to cover. So write a rough draft and then look back again at those instructions the professor gave you. Do a revision, look back again at the assignment instructions, revise again. And so use that as a kind of process of a back and forth between, you know, what you are producing for the assignment and what the professor asks for in the assignment directions. So definitely be thorough, cover everything your professor has asked, and double check. What I've just explained probably goes beyond double checking into triple checking and quadruple checking. But a peer can also help you with that, and so can a tutor as well. So following directions is really one of the biggest things before you submit that paper. Just make sure you can kind of check everything off that the professor has asked you to cover. And number 4, write a clear thesis kind of follows from point 3, which is following these directions, because usually your thesis is going to be turning around into a statement the question that your professor has asked you. You know, if your professor says, write a 10 to 12 page paper examining all of the causes of the Civil War. Well, your thesis is going to sound something like the causes of the Civil War were rooted in X, Y, and Z issues. You know, and so that's really just taking that question and turning it around as a statement. Now, you can't do that easily with every single paper assignment that you're given, but your thesis, a clear thesis, a successful thesis at least, is going to tell your reader what conclusions you ultimately draw at the end of the paper. You don't want there to be any mysteries in an academic paper. Mystery writing, mystery novels, that's a whole different genre, and those are good, but you don't want to leave to the end whodunit, right? The whodunit of the mystery novel. You've got, that thesis is essentially, in a nutshell, your entire argument. So everything's kind of got to be represented there, if possible, in that 1, maybe 2 sentences. For shorter writing assignments, it's probably just going to be 1 sentence, that thesis statement. And that happens at the very end of the introduction, where in the introduction, it's your opportunity to kind of tell your reader everything he or she knows to receive that, or everything he or she needs to know to receive that thesis statement, defining your major terms, giving some background. But really, everything that leads up in that first paragraph, its whole point is kind of just to deliver that thesis so that you can then start in on your argument. And I tell people that a scholarly paper is really just key repetition. You know, in the intro and thesis, you tell your reader what you're going to say. In your body paragraphs, you say it. And in your conclusion, you remind your reader of what you've said. So really, you've got the same ideas at least 3 times in the paper. So key repetition, but not unnecessary repetition, is one of the basics of scholarly writing. And about the thesis as well, you'll know that you've got a clear thesis if somebody could take the opposite side of what you're arguing. You know, so if you're arguing against the death penalty, and you said that in your thesis, you know that that's a clear, successful thesis because somebody could have taken the opposite side. You know, so we avoid things like factual statements in a thesis because really you can't argue, you know, oh, the clouds are in the sky, not in the grass kind of thing. You know, because that's just a fact of the natural world. I used to use the example of the grass is green, but that's not even really a fact because the grass can be brown for a lot of the year in some parts of the country. So, but yeah, I think you get what I'm talking about in terms of you have to enter a debate, and your thesis is what is the side or the position that you're taking in that debate. And the thesis is a big part of scholarly writing. That's got to be clear from the end of the intro all the way through your paper, and everything that you're sharing has to support that same argument, that thesis. Okay, can everyone see where we're at? Point number 5 on the screen, excellent. So point number 5 is another major way to be successful, and that's knowing the difference between summarizing and analyzing. oftentimes there will be language in your professor's question that will ask you to do a little bit more summary or a little bit more analysis. And you have to kind of read those prompts to be able to understand what your professor's asking from you. A summary is, if you've ever written a book report, you've written a summary, you've summarized that book. And so it's really just reproducing expert knowledge for your reader, for your audience in your paper. But an analysis does something more. And an analysis can use summary or have summary in it. But analysis goes one step farther, in which it will rely on this expert knowledge in order to advance a position or make the argument, offer a critique. Sometimes an analysis, if you're doing an analysis of the expert knowledge, you're critiquing it, and a critique doesn't have to be bad, it can just be an evaluation. So you're seeing either how this other person, other scholar got it right, or how this other scholar maybe got it wrong. That, all of that, those right or wrong judgments, that's analysis as opposed to summary. But in order to make that analysis, you may have to summarize parts of what the other person was saying, parts of their argument. And so understanding when you're summarizing, when you're analyzing, and what your professor is, what percentage and balance your professor is looking for, very key to being successful in scholarly writing. Any questions before I move on to point 6?
No questions.
Excellent. Okay. So properly developing paragraphs, one of the things you need at the very start of a body paragraph in an academic paper is you need to make a claim, make an assertion, and that's going to be the thing we call the topic sentence. The topic sentence basically tells your reader what the main idea of that body paragraph is. It's going to be related to your thesis. Oftentimes, it's just one little portion of that thesis, so that by the time you finish all of your body paragraphs, you've proven 100% of the thesis as you promised your reader. So first you make an assertion in the form of a topic sentence or maybe a mini topic sentence later on in the body paragraph. Then you offer support, various forms of evidence. You could summarize, maybe paraphrase, give a direct quote. And the difference between summary and paraphrase is going to be that, paraphrase is a little bit shorter, a little bit more condensed. And it's, of course, representing the other person's idea, but in your own words, as opposed to offering a direct quote. That's effective when the words of that quote, of that other person's idea, matter for your argument. So first you assert, make an assertion, make a claim, then you offer support, offer evidence to support that claim. But then you have to go one step further, and this is the third step that a lot of writers miss, and that's the third step is you have to tie your evidence back to what you promised it was going to prove. And so we often see this in student papers where we have a topic sentence, a direct quote, and then the follow-up sentence after the citation is, this quote shows that. And then the person goes on to explain really what we see. It's really teaching your reader what to see in your evidence that then helps your reader make the connection between, your thesis, what you promised you're going to prove, and the evidence that you're providing for it. So that is very important, where you're going to kind of tie the evidence back to your initial claim or assertion. That's 3 steps of the body paragraph, but you can often use that a couple of times within the same body paragraph. So for example, often you'll start a topic sentence, and then you'll offer evidence, analyze that evidence, offer somebody else's evidence, analyze that evidence, and that can kind of repeat, within the body paragraph a couple of times. Any questions about proper paragraph development? I know this is just a real quick overview of a lengthy process, an involved process. Okay, number 7, use a formal tone, but don't be wordy. This is really good advice because some people can overdo the formal tone, and it's hard to make sense of their ideas because they're trying to sound very philosophical, very, very formal, and the language tends to become almost like you're reading a thesaurus, and that's not quite what we want in scholarly writing. What we're looking for is for you to have good ideas that you state clearly. Because if a reader can't access or understand your good ideas, they're lost, right, on the reader. So essentially, that's what we're looking for. And we want something to be said concisely, because you're really going to say that thing at least 3 times over the course of your paper. Remember, we talked about how there's key repetition that happens in a scholarly paper. So you don't really need to go on and on about an idea the first or second time you're talking about it, because you're going to come back to it again. And you'll be able to maybe say it in a new way, or share a little bit slightly of a different approach to that same idea with the reader. So definitely try to speak like, or write like you know what you're talking about. You know, be an expert in your own paper, but don't overdo it, and try to just have the best ideas stated in a clear and simple fashion, easily understandable for your reader. Any questions about that? April and I were just talking prior to the start of the webinar about if you write like you talk, you might run into problems if you're not revising that before submitting to your professor, because oral language has its own kind of rules and success strategies that are different from writing a scholarly paper, you know, on the page. So we can talk more about that at the end if you all have any questions. But number 8, using transitions. One of the ways you can help your reader follow your thought process is by employing transitional words or phrases. So words like however or on the other hand imply that you're going to say the opposite, or more or less the opposite of what you've just said. And so your reader can prepare him or herself for that shift in thought and that shift in logic. Other single transitional words like similarly, likewise, I'm blanking on any others, but moreover, words like that will imply that you're going to stick with the same kind of thought you just shared in the previous sentence before that one. And so using transition words or transitional phrases, you know, longer things that just help your reader map out where you've come from and where you're going with your thought can be very successful in terms of getting someone else who maybe isn't likely or doesn't want to agree with you, convincing them that what you're saying is right. And that's actually our last point here on this, you know, quick drive-by of the basics of scholarly writing, which is the whole goal of a scholarly paper is to persuade. It's persuasive writing. And it doesn't really make for such a success if you've been able to convince someone who's already likely to agree with you. But where you really know that you've done a good job in using logic and using credible sources is when you can imagine a reader who wanted to kind of disagree with you every step along the way. And at the end of the paper, you feel like you've covered everything thoroughly enough and in depth enough that you feel like this imaginary cantankerous reader from the other side couldn't, you know, but finish reading your paper and say, well, I absolutely agree now at this time with this author, because they've done such a great job of laying everything out and helping me follow their thought process, which for scholarly writing is mainly based on logic. Although there are a couple of times in a scholarly paper, and depending on the context of the assignment, where you might be able to tug a little at a reader's heartstrings and use kind of emotional appeals. But if your entire paper is an emotional appeal, it's not going to work well for a scholarly paper. Mostly what we're trying to do is present ourselves as experts, that we've done the work, you know, required to be able to make this case to someone else, that we're presenting credible sources, and that we've cited those sources, that we're analyzing those sources properly, and that we've laid out points that all add up to, you know, agreeing with our initial thesis. So I'm sharing some resources here with you all at the bottom of our handout, which I'll post. And if you want to email me, my email's at the top of this. I'll show you that in a bit. I can just send you this outline. But the Purdue University Online Writing Lab has a lot of really stellar resources for scholarly writing. They also have little style sheets for any style, whether it's APA, I think they even have Chicago, AMA, MLA as well. So lots of tidbits about even little exercises to learn how not to be wordy in your writing, which means just cutting down the words and saying it in less words, fewer words, actually, I should say. Okay. ChompChomp.com is a really great website for practicing grammar mechanics. They have online exercises that you do and you immediately get corrected, or you get feedback that you've chosen the right answer. So that's really helpful for practicing grammar mechanics issues. Our Sacred Heart Learning Center blog, we've got some resources up there, and this outline, the recording of our webinar today, will be available there. And then here's you can actually just Google, make an appointment with a tutor, Sacred Heart Writing Center, and this is the link that will pop up. So you can always find out where to make an appointment with a tutor. This is for in-person tutoring at the Writing Center, but up there as well is information about our online writing lab, where you can schedule a video conference with me or one of our other tutors, and submit your papers electronically through this portal, and then get feedback within 24 to 48 hours. Okay. So questions from anyone? April, I think do we have Pamela still on here? I think we lost Pamela.
Okay, I don't have any questions, but everything that you said does make sense.
Okay, and, good.
Yeah, so I just need to practice, just, outline, following directions, making sure that I have a clear thesis, and then just really being specific in my summary, or being more analyzed, like having a more analyzed thought process of my paper, of what I'm writing. So, I understand exactly what you're saying. I guess the point is now it's just using my motor skills to just be creative, and just have it put all down on paper.
Yeah. So, and it's okay to overwrite and then cut out what you think is not the most successful parts of your writing. For any paper that I write, I tend to overwrite. That's one of the things I have to, just part of my process. So if I was writing like a 3-page paper, I would probably draft 5 to 6 pages and then cut back to what I thought was the best parts of my thinking, Okay. And so that might help as well. But I love how you summarized what we did here. That's good. Yeah. And you mentioned something that I did not cover here, but I think is an important point to mention, which is being very detailed and very specific.
Right.
Within your body paragraphs, you want to really get into those specifics for sure. And even possibly in your introduction, sharing specifics about a historical background on the topic, for instance, but specific writing is always better than kind of general, vague writing. So I like that you were able to add something very key to your understanding of the basics of scholarly writing. So, excellent. Okay, well, I've been
doing some research, because this is something that I have been struggling with, but I am, I feel like that, I'm kind of getting the picture of it now, So, it's been a while since I wrote anything. So just starting all over and jumping back into it, it's been a real challenge for me.
Understandable, but glad to hear that you think it's coming along.
Yes.
Well, and we can follow up privately. If you want to email me anything that you're working on, I can take a look at it. I'd be happy to.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. And I've got some other seminars. I guess you saw the flyer.
I know. Yeah, I was trying to write them down. So I see the next one you have is July the 9th.
July 9th, and that's APA style at 7 p.m.
Okay. And what's your next one?
Sentence construction. We're doing proper sentence construction on Wednesday, July 17th, also at 7 p.m.
Okay.
And then the last one we've got scheduled for now is Friday, July 26th. It's on revision strategies, and that's at 6 p.m.
Okay, great. I will be taking part in all of those seminars.
Fantastic. I look forward to seeing you again. Okay.
Thank you. And you have a great Sunday.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.